I'm Willemien Kleijn. I work at the College of Orientation Mobility in South Africa. Sorry. And I want to present you today about the program that we've been presenting here at this college for the past years. Next year is actually our 70th, well, this year is the Guide Dogs Association's 70th birthday, and next year is the 50th of the college. But basically, I'm one of the instructors here. I'm a training materials developer. And yeah, let's run through and let me explain to you what's happening in our country. It was interesting actually to listen to what's happening in Greece, and some of your problems are very similar to some of ours. Let's see if I can get this to right. So orientation mobility has been in South Africa since the 60s. As I said, we're celebrating the college's 50th anniversary next year. So it arrived here in the late 1960s, early 1970s. At the time, a first program was taught by a UK instructor in 1968. And then South Africans went off overseas to study, and one went to the USA and another few went to the UK. And very importantly, there was Ken Lord, who for many years was the CEO of Guide Dogs Association. And in 1969, he was sent to the UK by the organization. I still knew him. He was alive when I first started working here, and he told me he went kicking and screaming. He was a guide dog instructor, and although he went kicking and screaming, when he came back, he was very, very excited about O&M, and he then established the O&M school in South Africa. So the school opened in 1974, as I say, 50 years next year. And the first courses, they were run by some of Ken's own instructors, Dan Underwood, Tom Davis, and he also ran a couple of courses himself. And at that time, it was 6-month courses. So people learned the basics of O&M, and then they went off and they taught visually impaired people in South Africa. Another major character, and some of you may know her, is Moira Higgety. She was trained in the UK in 1974, and then she joined the School of O&M in 1981. So, because Ken Lord realized that this school needed someone to be permanently part of it and to run it and move it forward, which is precisely what Moira then went on to do. She presented 26 courses until her retirement in 2016. And during that time, she transformed it from a school of O&M to a college of O&M. So basically, that growth was first from 6 months to 1 year in 1988. And then a very important step was that it became a nationally recognized qualification. So the first diploma was registered in 2004, and its graduates were 11 in 2010. In the meantime, they were working on a new updated version. So the updated version was registered in 2009 with its first graduates in 2013. And at present, we still have learners studying under that qualification. Just to give you a background to help you understand what happens in South Africa and how it works, we have a South African National Qualifications Framework, which was established in 1995 through the SAQA Act. And at that time, they created SAQA, the South African Qualifications Authority, to oversee the development of a national qualifications framework, also known as the NQF. So at that time, for the next years until 2008, they focused a lot on developing and registering occupationally directed qualifications. Now, you have to remember, 95 is the year after the new democratic government in 1994 in South Africa. And at that time, there was a lot of, a lack of education, especially in certain groups of the population. And there was a real need for people to have access to occupationally directed qualifications to qualifications that would lead to professions and to occupations. So the focus was very strongly on that initially, although at the same time there were the universities and they were running, they were not, SAQA wasn't involving them at that point in time. And they were working together with sector education and training authorities. And each of those has a focus on a different sector. So there's, for example, the health and welfare sector, there's the agriculture sector, the banking sector, etc. So each of these focuses on a sector, they know their sector, they then encourage education and training in their sector, and they developed qualifications for their sector. At that point in time, there were 8 levels to the National Qualifications Framework. And yeah, that's the sort of focus. They were focusing very much on occupations in the different sectors using those 8 levels. And those qualifications were at that time based on unit standards. And each unit standard is then basically like a module, a component of learning with various criteria and outcomes. And that was the structure that was used. So the initial qualifications that were registered in terms of orientation mobility were also linked to that, and they were 2-year diplomas, and they were at a level 5, which is the first level after high school. I'm assuming most countries do have high school up until grade 12. It's in South Africa. Different countries have different numbering, but basically a grade 12 learner would be around 18, 19 years of age, and then it's their first level after high school. And in terms of the O&M qualification, it was registered under Education, Training and Development Practices, CETA. In 2008, new legislation was passed, and that was the NQF Act, and it now wanted to unite all qualifications under one umbrella. So the National Qualifications Framework would include all of those, not just the occupational ones, so it would also include the university ones. And SAQA was no longer directly involved in the qualification development, but would now oversee the whole process, all the different qualifications. And those would be controlled through quality councils. So there were already existing quality councils for the universities and for basic education levels, but they needed to create a new one to oversee occupational qualifications, which they did. So the new structure is then SAQA is overseeing the CHE, which is the Council Higher Education. So that one oversees the universities. And then you've got Umalusi, which oversees further education and training colleges. So that's basically your lower levels. It's essentially the same levels as high school, grades 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's the focus of Umalusi, which is levels 1 to 4 of the National Qualifications Framework. And this, of course, is targeted at adult education. Not everybody in South Africa, and I guess in other countries as well, has the opportunity to initially complete their high schooling, so then they can go to a further education and training college. And then the category that's relevant for us is the Quality Council for Trades and Occupations, and there are various colleges for trades and occupations, including then the College of Orientation and Mobility. So the NQF levels then also were developed up to level 10 now. So the first 4 levels, as I said, fall under Umalusi and their high school or equivalent. And then the next level is an undergraduate certificate or equivalent. And then there's the undergraduate diploma or equivalent, and the 3-year degree or equivalent at level 7. At level 8, you've got a 4-year degree or an honours degree or equivalent. At level 9, you'd be looking at a master's degree, and at level 10, a doctoral degree. So the levels 1 to 4 is Umalusi, and then the levels 5 to 10 is the Council Higher Education. And then in terms of the occupational qualifications, they can sit on any level between 1 and 8. So based on all these changes and the fact that the qualification was registered in 2009, under the old system, it was high time for a new qualification to be developed. So you've got the old organizations, the old qualification components of 2009, the unit standard-based system, which has now been adjusted. So that all needed to be updated. And in addition to that, the original qualification with its unit standards, they were not all fit for purpose. There were unit standards that were borrowed from other professions. So for example, there's a unit standard on facilitation, which is generic. We adjust it for our purposes, but it's a generic unit standard. So we really would have, when we were looking at creating a new qualification, we really wanted to ensure that all the components were fit for purpose. So as I said, generic facilitation unit standard. There was also outdated terminology and theory. So in terms of terminology, you might have human guide still referred to as sighted guide. Now, I noted that in the first presentation, it was still mentioned as sighted guide, whereas in the second presentation from the US, we're talking human guide. And this is just terminology, but it does make a difference, and it does place one into an international context. And then, so in terms of theory, also at that point, there was very little theoretical basis, and we have been introducing our own theory as we go along, but we wanted it to be included in the actual qualifications right up. The other thing that we wanted to update was the fact that the qualification was at a level 5, although it was a 2-year qualification. So if you think someone leaves school at level 4, and then they study for 2 years and they still only have a level 5. So the current structure that we're falling under, it's QCTO, as I said, Quality Council Trades and Occupations, and the ETDPC is still involved. They're still a partner to help manage qualifications in that sector, which includes ours. And then from there, the new qualification structure is that there must be a training provider, which in this case is the College of O&M. Then there has to be a workplace where the person will get their practical training. And then there needs to be an assessment center where there's an external assessment. So by the new structure, the qualifications need to have these different role players, and they need to work together. The components of the new qualification are also adjusted. So there's a knowledge component where people obviously need to spend time in class, learning things, learning theories, and learning basic knowledge. And then there's a practical component where they need to be blindfolded and do stuff themselves. And then lastly, there is a workplace component where they need to teach clients. Now, just as a matter of interest, if you look at the second 2 photos, you can see South Africa has a variety of different contexts and different places where we provide our training. In the middle, you find people who are living in an urban area. This is actually taken at a complex where there's a lot of flats. And then on the right-hand side, you actually see a very typical area where our clients are taught. And it's pavement is a luxury. There isn't such a thing as pavements in most places. It's just dirt areas, and sometimes there's even nothing. It's people walking on the street. That's why I say the Greek situation kind of reminds us of our own, except that it looks a little more urban there. In South Africa, you have a lot more what would almost look rural-ish, but it's a lot of people living in small spaces with a lot of dirt roads. In addition to those 3 components, the knowledge, practical, and workplace, there's now also an external exam, which kind of similar to what the USA, you've got your board exam. Well, this is almost like that, except that it's run not by a board specifically, it's actually run through the education system. So there's an external integrated summative assessment, which composes of theory and practical. Incidentally, you see here photos of past learners, and the college has always done some of this to some extent on our own bat. It hasn't been external, it's been run by us ourselves, but chances are good that we will actually register not only as a training center, but also as an assessment center. So we'll probably end up still doing the assessments ourselves. As part of the process of updating the qualification, we also looked at the international situation. So we compared ourselves internationally. And when I was doing the research for that, In the USA, you've basically got your qualification at a postgraduate level, master's degree level often, although technically, according to the registration process, I think you are allowed to do an honours degree level, but it seems the universities are not offering that, from what I could tell. So that's the equivalent of South Africa's NQF level 9. And in those qualifications, it's just orientation mobility, and SDL is a separate qualification. So in the UK, and it seems to me also in Greece, from what I was listening to, you had, well, I don't know about the foundational degree, but in the UK, it's a foundational degree, which is our equivalent of a level 7. So it's a 3-year level, although in, I think the UK actual qualification is 2 years, but it's at that level. And it includes both O&M and SDL, which is, as I say, what I was hearing happening in Greece as well. In South Africa, our situation is slightly different, and it's unique in a certain way. Our qualification has always been undergraduate. It's never been at a degree or master's degree level. There are few lecturers available to teach if it were to become a higher level. And there's also fewer candidates available for this because our social service professions already have a huge shortage. There's a huge shortage of OT, occupational therapists, of biokineticists, even teachers with special ed. There's a lot of need for all these services. And if we were to now take people from that to do a master's degree or an honours degree, that actually cuts into already shortage of professionals. There are also few jobs, and all of them, obviously, because it's been undergraduate, have undergraduate salary scales. And the fortunate thing, and this is all very exciting, we've actually received some news on the progress on this. We are in process of registering under the Occupational Therapy Board as an auxiliary level worker, that is a worker under supervision. And just this past week, a notice went out in a government gazette to say that people have 3 months to comment, and after that, they will open up the register for our O&M practitioners to register under the OT board. So that will be an exciting move because it will probably increase the number of jobs available. But as I say, it has the registration at that particular level based on our current situation. And due to the same thing, in South Africa, we call our practitioners, well, we call them practitioners. We don't call them specialists as the USA does, quite simply because they're not. They are practitioners with all the skills they need to do their job, but they're not somebody who is a biokineticist with a specialization or whatever it is that they studied first. We might upgrade this in future, but if we were to have done it right now, we would have destroyed the qualification and the profession because nobody would have been able to be trained, and that would have been the end of the whole profession and qualification, which would be really, really sad. So we stuck to our situation and our levels of education and worked within what we had. The other thing that is a very South African thing, and it sounds to me like it's also in Greece, is that we are the only profession that actually specializes in the rehabilitation of people with visual impairment, which means that we need to do both O&M and SDL. Skills of daily living needs to be included in our qualification because otherwise people won't get all the services they need. Yes, there are some occupational therapists who do provide those services, but generally in South Africa, our occupational therapists do not have a lot of knowledge of visual impairment. And that is something we now need to obviously work on if they are to supervise the O&M practitioners. So that is a new big thing that's coming up, to work with the occupational therapists to prepare them for their new role as supervisors of O&M practitioners. Again, possibly not ideal, but you work within the constraints you have. So what does this new qualification then look like? We have upgraded it to an NQF level 6, which we felt was very important to do. And then we have included the skills of daily living as well as the orientation mobility. We have put in a greater emphasis on theory. We are trying to upgrade here, so that means we need to be on par with international standards to some extent. We have also done a greater integration of the various interventions, the orientation, mobility, skills of daily living, psychosocial, and focusing on both blind and partially sighted people. So at present, the qualification, as I said, it's unit standard. So there's a unit standard on orientation, a unit standard on mobility, a unit standard on skills of daily living, a unit standard on counselling. And it's very easy for learners to then see them as separate bits and pieces. But with the new qualification, we were able to give a greater integration, which we felt was very important. We've also expanded the components about networking and advocacy. So networking is linking up with other professions, and advocacy obviously creating that greater awareness, which again was interesting to hear how in Greece that's also something that's very important. Then on our knowledge modules, so the modules we then actually created, and you'll notice they sound very similar to the components that were mentioned by the previous presenter in the US. We had the module professionalism and practice methods. So there we talk about ethics and the different places where you might practice and how you would work in those situations. And then we talked about physiological and medical aspects. So that's your sound and hearing, light and vision, other senses, various medical conditions, just understanding, a basic understanding of the human body and how other medical conditions will affect orientation and mobility. Then there's psychosocial aspects, which is where you deal with the emotional adjustment and human growth and development. Traditionally, we've focused in human growth just on children, and now we've also said, no, we need to expand that all the way through to gerontology. Again, an interesting overlap with previous presenter, that's becoming more of a thing. In South Africa, a lot of our clients are older persons that become visually impaired later in life. So it's important for our students to be aware of that. And also there's a growing need for orientation mobility with children. Then we're looking at skills of daily living theory, orientation mobility theory, and then lastly, instructional methods, strategies, and assessment. So those are all very important knowledge components, and they feed then into our practical and workplace modules, which is to be able to assess the client, plan an intervention, implement and evaluate that intervention, and do networking and advocacy. So this is all the practical implementation of the previously mentioned modules. And as you see, this allows us to integrate the knowledge that was developed and let them first practice it practically, and then go out into the workplace and actually implement what they've learned. So the way forward at this point is that we will finish the registration process, which is unfortunately dragging along. The current qualification ends in June of this year, but there will still be an opportunity to register until next year, new learners, and then the final graduation will have to be in 2028. To do that, we need to adjust and make our training materials, and really those theory components and will need upgrading. Hopefully we'll be able to run our first course in 2026. That's sort of the target at this point in time, but who knows? Then we gathered international input to develop, and upgrading it really requires us to get more access to international knowledge and best practice. Hence, in 2021, the College of Orientation Mobility sent a candidate to Western Michigan University to complete her master's degree there in O&M with children. Our child focus was actually quite weak, so this has really made a difference for us, and she's now using her training to upskill O&M practitioners and lecturers at the college, and also she's doing a lot of talks and a lot of awareness at present. And she's also bringing her knowledge into the training materials and updating them. International partnerships are very important to us to help that. And as I mentioned, she went to Western Michigan University, and we're eager to maintain that partnership. And we're also eager to forge new partnership and learn from other international partners. So on that note, here is our contact details. This is my boss's contact details. If any of you are keen to support us and assist us, we would love to hear from you. It's more a case of sharing of knowledge, sharing of best practice, and just learning from how other people are doing it and to see how we can adapt that theory and best practice to our situation in South Africa. Thank you very much for your attention.